The original 2004 Star Wars Battlefront is a title many remember fondly. While you might have originally picked it up either because of the franchise it's a part of, or because it just seemed like a novel thing to try at the time, surely if you're watching this video, it's because Battlefront 1 left an impression on you. And not without good reason to either. It is simply a fun game, and one that's still being enjoyed by plenty of people, even now 2 decades, a couple spin-offs, a sequel, and a whole franchise reboot later. And I want to make the case that the reason the original Battlefront has lasted so long isn't just because of the brand name it's attached to, or the story, or the nostalgia factor alone, but specifically because, as a team-based shooter, it shows off some of the best map design in gaming, period. So please join me as I briefly break down what makes each of the original Star Wars Battlefront's maps so good. Today, I want to talk about what I think of as the original Battlefront's most chaotic map, Yavin 4 Arena. I think one of the major strengths of the first Battlefront, and the 2005 sequel for that matter, is how just about every map's layout varied so much. The different locations weren't just aesthetic changes, but more importantly, every individual map's layout and size, and what vehicles it might have had, all impacted what the gameplay on it was like. Even though you always had the same playable classes and weapons, you often got a vastly different gameplay experience from map to map. On some maps, there was more of an attacker-defender dynamic. Some maps supported vehicle battles, some were open and outdoors with long sightlines which promoted sniping and longer distance engagements, and some focused more on having enclosed choke points to contest. You got a lot of variety. And that design philosophy probably explains how we got at least one map like this one, Yavin 4 Arena, because it does something quite unlike any other map in the game. Arena gives you a more or less symmetrical battlefield, where both sides always start with equal opportunity and equal positions. That, in and of itself, isn't unique in Battlefront 1, but unlike, say, Naboo plains or Bespin platforms, you're not fighting in some huge, bright, open-air environment. Here in the titular arena, you'll mainly be fighting in a small, dark, cramped, enclosed pit. The enemy will always be close, there will be blaster fire going in every direction, there's grenades constantly bouncing off the walls, visibility is generally pretty low, as is your life expectancy here. So I've always felt it was more than appropriate to call this the designated Chaos map. But, just in case you've never taken the time to really examine the design choices that went into the original Battlefront's arena, let's talk about exactly why that is. The arena is situated in a small strip of land within a clearing in one of Yavin's dark forests. The entire gameplay area, as a whole, is already one of the smallest maps in the original Battlefront already. But the actual area you'll be playing and fighting in is even smaller. That is, largely in and around a square-shaped pit in the center of the map. This pit, this ancient ruined arena, is just big enough to contain one central command post. Within the pit is a handful of partially destroyed walls, but no major structures or standing rooms. And these walls don't really obscure the fact that the pit itself is so small, there's virtually no real room to hide in it. Once you're down there, it's just a brutal and immediate shootout with the other team for that command point in the middle. Just above the arena pit itself, each of the two teams start every match with one spawn point command post in small balcony alcove rooms directly opposite one another. Starting here, you can either drop directly into the arena to join the fight in there, or exchange fire with the enemy alcove on the other side. It's a rare example of your starting spawn point being in direct conflict with the enemy right from the beginning of the match. Outside the confines of the arena proper, should you choose to navigate out of your starting alcove and away from the fighting in the pit, there are actually vehicles provided for each team. These vehicles can't ever get into the arena though, so more often than not you'll choose instead to focus your efforts inside. But on occasion, particularly in multiplayer matches, you might see a few players from both sides decide they'd rather tank fight outside away from everything else. You don't get a lot of room outside though, not enough to move around properly in, and not as much as you'd typically get on any map with vehicles. So any vehicle-to-vehicle combat here is likely to just look like two fairly constrained tanks or walkers just shooting at each other without moving until one explodes. That's really just about all there is to the layout. The central pit, a starting box on either side, and a pretty sparse area outside with little more than a couple decorative trees in it. But I would like to point out here also, the aesthetics of this map do contribute to the gameplay in a way they don't often directly do in Battlefront. Here on Yavin, it's dark out. There's a whole low lighting level ambience to the whole level. There's some pretty thick, waist-high foliage growing all over the bottom of the pit, and between that and the colour of the ground and the grubby walls of the whole ancient arena complex, it's often a lot harder to spot and recognise the enemy here than it is on most maps. Plus the map's small size and your constant proximity to the enemy, and these harsh, low visibility conditions, all add up to a high intensity, often very quick-paced battle with a high casualty turnover rate. Through no real fault of your own, you could get sniped the second you spawn in, or half the server could get taken out in an instant with a well-placed grenade down in the pit. The fighting on Arena is surely some of, if not the, most chaotic you'll see anywhere in the game. But, despite all the chaos, I maintain that one of Battlefront's biggest strengths as a game, as a team-based shooter, is in how all its playable classes remain generally balanced across the board. As a rule of thumb, no matter what overall situation you're in, you are given sufficient tools to fight with. And this game, even at its most asymmetric, doesn't force you into unfairly unbalanced scenarios. Not that asymmetry is even necessarily the biggest issue on a map like Arena, where intentionally small, cramped, intense, and chaotic as it may be, it is essentially as symmetrical and simple as any map in this game can be. Just a perfect square you jump into and fight in. But, as to what fighting looks like here, this is where all that well-designed class balance comes in. And like I said, even in conditions such as they are here, everyone has a role and every class remains viable. No matter what faction you're playing as, the basic soldier class and their trusty blaster rifle is likely going to remain the backbone of your force. As one of these guys, you're going to be able to put up a proper fight over that central command post, take a few shots, give a few back, and as you'll soon learn, you can get a lot out of your grenades on this map in particular. The arena is so small you can throw one to virtually anywhere in the pit, from anywhere in the pit, once you're down there. Just so long as you make sure not to let those sometimes hard to see bits of crumbled wall and debris get in your way. If you're an experienced Battlefront 1 player, I can't necessarily say you'll stay alive here as long as you might on some other maps when you're playing well, but if you do know what you're doing, you can go decently far with just the basic soldier. If you don't mind being a little less subtle though, the Demolitions Trooper class can be surprisingly helpful in Arena, even though this isn't his usual ideal operating condition, taking down heavy armour on big maps. Since there's only the perfunctory few vehicles outside and away from the main battle, the heavy weapons specialist can still contribute meaningfully. A high-risk, high-reward strategy that might just work out for you using these guys is simply running right into the fray in the pit and going for direct rocket launcher kills against easy infantry targets. Your reload time will slow you down between shots, but you can still help whittle down the enemy's numbers at a decent clip with the instant splash damage having kills your rockets are. Once you're out of rockets, you could even try hiding some mines in the foliage. People think that the large, obvious, red blinking light having mines don't actually work in Battlefront, but in all my experience playing, I beg to differ. And honestly, as the Demolitions Trooper, with how intense the fighting here is, you'll probably not even get to the point where your rather limited ammo supply really becomes an issue. But once you've swiftly respawned, if you want to try something different, consider your other options. For instance, again, the all-faction Technician class may not have a lot of utility on Arena as a vehicle repairer, but you've got your own health and ammo dispenser. That might just keep you alive a few seconds longer. And both the blaster shotgun and the mortar launcher are really solid, quick-fire, short-range weapons. All the engineers' weapons might not be particularly effective at long range, but here in the arena, there really isn't a long range. And lastly, if you'd prefer to stay out of the pit for the time being, you can always choose to play as the marksman class instead. After all, you'll always have the option to stay in your little default spawn point alcove and try to take pot shots at both the other snipers on the other side, as well as everyone else on the enemy team as they load in and start running for the pit themselves. But remember, even when you're just a sniper, you still have to stay on your toes on this map, since you could just as easily get headshot by the folks opposite practically any time at this short distance. When I'm talking about most maps in this game, at this point I'd usually mention something about how every faction's special units have some particular advantage, or some situational way to utilize their unique traits. But honestly, I think that's much less the case here on Arena than with most Battlefront locations. The Empire and the Republic's respective jetpack troopers don't get a heap out of being able to fly around here, since there isn't really anything to fly to, and the map is so small there isn't even really anywhere to get in a hurry. Similarly, anyone playing as the CIS droidica isn't all that likely to get much out of being able to roll around, and its shield can only help so much when you're in grenade range of every other unit on the map at all times, practically. Even the Rebels' Wookiee smuggler is essentially just a marginally tougher version of their soldier, and that little bit of extra health isn't going to save them all that often in the pit, especially not when paired with their generally slower firing weapons. This is the chaotic map, after all, where everything goes by faster, and a lot of the tactical gameplay you might get on other maps often goes out the window pretty early on. But I don't mean to disparage Arena, and with how generally balanced all the regular units in the game are, no matter which of those classes you opt for, you're going to have a fun way to contribute to that chaos. This map, and its unique playstyle, might not be everyone's cup of tea, but as I alluded to earlier, I think the biggest strength of Battlefront 1 is how much variety of gameplay it has. It's great that pretty much every map in the game has its own identity beyond just being aesthetic reskins of all the same gameplay. That's probably why this game has remained as popular as it is for as long as it has in the first place. And that said, if you might like to hear me break down what makes those other Battlefront maps so good, there will be a Battlefront map analysis playlist linked at the top of the description, or you can subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the next video. Either way, goodbye for now, and have a lovely day.